3:02, so we will go ahead and get started. We will be muting you as you enter, and we are recording today's session. But with that being said, there are a few housekeeping items that I'm going to go over real quick. So again, like I said, due to the number of participants, we're automatically muting your phones to eliminate any interferences. Please enter any questions or comments into the chat box. If we have something to add to the conversation, please note it in the chat box and we will call on you if you would like to speak. You may also send any questions through email to professional@asd.org and we will be monitoring that. But again, great team of panelists today, so please ask any questions in the chat box. Please also turn your video off to avoid sharing your video with the group or being captured in the recording. And then also please close all other applications, especially email, so that your system will run smoothly. And please keep all conversation geared towards the benefit of the community and today's topic. So with all of that out of the way, we will begin today's roundtable with introductions from our panelists. Then each panelist will share their perspectives and insights on today's topic. The panelists will also respond to questions from the audience as well. So again, great team of panelists that are about to introduce themselves, so please ask as many questions as possible in the chat box. But we will turn things over to Gawain first to introduce himself. Gawain, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Gawain Charlton Perrin. I'm the Director of Risk Management at Hanover Insurance Group. I wanted to make it clear that I'm not an engineer nor an architect, but I have worked as an attorney in private practice, defending design professionals as well as construction companies, subcontractors, et cetera, and owners also. So I have familiarity with the industry. And since being on the insurance side since 2004, have worked with design professionals as well as lawyers. And the perspective I'm bringing today is what's always from the carrier's perspective. So I can't always speak to what the day-to-day changes that have we've had incredible changes that have been put upon all of us since about March of 2020, and how it affects our individual practices. If you're out in the field, you're working as an architect or engineer. I'm going to bring the perspective from the carrier side. Obviously, we were highly concerned when the world changed in March of 2020, and we've been looking at it, and that's the perspective I'll bring today. So thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. You bring an awesome perspective that we can't wait to hear, so thanks so much. We'll go ahead and turn things over next to Jim. Jim, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Jim Harris. I'm a structural engineer from Denver, Colorado. I have a firm that is a small firm. We have 8 professional engineers, an intern, and 1 administrative person. And so I'll give you the perspective from a small structural engineering firm. Our work is fundamentally 3 areas: design for construction. Some of it's new construction, some of it's repair, remodel, and rehabilitation. We also do a moderate amount of failure and distress investigations and reports. And we have our fingers into applied research and development also. The kinds of structures we deal with are buildings, civil structures, industrial structures, and a lot of work in temporary works, excavation, bracing, and things like that. And it certainly has affected the way we work in our office in a big way.
Absolutely. The impact has been huge, right? Michelle, we'll turn things over to you next.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Michelle Herline, and I am the Chief Human Resource Officer for Barge Design Solutions. So I am not an engineer or an architect either. Bring the HR, really my expertise in employee experience, organizational culture, and change management. We are a multidisciplinary firm with 16 offices in the Southeast.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us. It's also great to get that HR perspective too. We want to hear every angle, right, of this and how it impacts engineers across the globe. So it's fantastic. We appreciate you joining us. Dan, I'll turn to you next. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, I'm Dan Harpstead. I'm the Risk Mitigation Director for Kleinfelder. I also serve as Director of Quality for Kleinfelder. So I have 2 roles, and they overlap a little bit, and that I generally get involved in projects from the go, no-go stage when we're making a decision as to whether the risks fit our company profile. And then I also work extensively with our legal team in projects that didn't go so well. So I'm involved in lots of different aspects of the projects. And my perspective on the COVID is that how we had our internal systems for quality organized in advance of the pandemic actually served us very well. We have 70 offices in North America, and we had to make massive adjustments in the way we deliver our projects, but our quality systems functioned maybe even better than they had before as a result of having to pay attention to the COVID perspective. So that's what I bring to this conversation today. Thank you.
Awesome, and thanks so much for joining us. We can't wait to hear what you have to say on this topic. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and start off with our kickoff question. How have your operations changed during the pandemic, and what lessons have you learned during this transitionary time? So Gawain, can I start with you first?
Sure. So, keep in mind, I'm coming from the carrier perspective, so it's not the day-to-day work as a design professional. But what we have been sort of, and this is uncharted water, so we didn't know what was going to happen. But as soon as the world sort of changed, somewhere around that March of 2020 mark, we were immediately concerned how it was going to impact. No one really knew how it was going to impact the economy as a whole, as well as our individual insureds, as well as insurance carriers. And there was some concern about some initial claim upticks happening right then, but of course you have to remember that at the same time the courts started, were shut down, and certainly shut down for anything but criminal matters, and civil matters were put off. And so from the carrier perspective, what we really learned was the sky wasn't falling per se right away. The world felt like it, but we suddenly realized there was a downturn in actual claims being made, because keep in mind, and then a slowdown in court, cases that were already ongoing were put off. And so we saw less claims initially as things have started to open up. However, we anticipate that there's a backlog of claims, so we'll see that increase, but it's a lot later than we, lot later than we anticipated. And then it's had some other sort of minor effects in the sense of things slowed down, so things weren't settled. Things certainly weren't going to trial, but some plaintiffs practitioners we saw were a little bit more inclined to go to mediation. So because they realized with the court being shut down, the delays, they may not see money for their clients for a lot longer than they normally would have. These cases can take 2 or 3 years to develop. But we saw a little bit more push to get to mediation early from the plaintiff side, which, from our perspective, for the types of design firms that we insure, which tend to be on the smaller side, getting to mediations earlier and trying to resolve them if we can. Can't always resolve them, but we try to resolve them, because just the impact of litigation itself increases expenses for all the parties, but certainly the smaller parties get affected by the same type of expenses as the larger firms do. So we were pleased with that. So some of the lessons learned is we just don't know. We keep trying to hold out a crystal ball and figure out where we're going to go from here. To some extent, what we've seen just coming out in this spring, speaking more of March, April, as the vaccines rolled out, projects started again in the spring, and we saw then as some type of projects weren't the same. So first off, we expect to see claims for projects that may have been completed prior to March of 2020. Now they're going to be a delay claim coming saying, had you just got this done before COVID hit, we wouldn't have been delayed a year, and lumber and materials would have cost less than they do now. So not only were we delayed, but things cost more now to complete those projects. And as such, we've seen a lot of changes in the ownership. The contractors may have dropped out. So suddenly a design professional has a contract with a particular owner, has a new owner come in, maybe they're not as familiar with, or a new general contractor comes in, they're not as familiar with, or are and not comfortable with working with. On the flip side, you could have the same owner or the same general contractor, but they're deciding to go with a different design professional firm. So from a design professional standpoint, you're supplanting the original designer. Some things may have already been done. They don't wish to pay for you, so you have to rely upon the work of your predecessor, so to speak. So those are some of the things. They haven't all resulted in claims yet because we're very new, and architects, engineers claims tend to have a very long tail in the sense you might not see things for a year or two, but we do expect more claims along those lines than design, and then of course delay claims, et cetera. So, it's an ongoing thing. Each day is a little bit of a new day, and we're trying to roll with it and adjust to it, and do the best we can for our insureds and obviously our bottom line as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Jim, how have things changed for you all during the pandemic as far as operations go?
Okay, sure. Well, I'll describe real briefly what our quality control system was before, because we had very little work from home going on before the pandemic came. Occasionally, there would be a medical situation arise where somebody had to be at home for months. And so we had a little bit of experience with remote work, but not much. And so we had two kinds of quality control: formal reviews. You schedule a point in time early in the project to review the scope of work and the design criteria to make sure that the engineers aren't going off on the wrong path. And you have very formal final checks. And the final checks on design projects focused almost entirely on drawings, and on investigations and research projects, they focused almost entirely upon reports. And literally every sentence in a report, every dimension and material call out and cross-sectional size and stuff like that on a drawing is checked. Those are the products that we are communicating with our clients on. In the case of construction, the drawings are what the building is built from, for example. We didn't do a lot of formal checking of calculations at that stage because contractor doesn't use the calculations to build the building. And we had a philosophy that checking the calculations as part of the checking of the drawings can lead a checker down the same mistaken path that the person performing the calculations to begin with followed, if you will. That doesn't mean we didn't check calculations, but it was mostly informal, intermediate stuff. A lot of our quality control is what I call MBWA, management by walking around, over-the-shoulder reviews. And so a lot of the calculation checks and things like that were being done in that sort of very informal fashion. Well, that is what changed in a very big way. Everything, management by walking around is completely recast when you're in a work from home environment. So we found we needed to have frequent, often regularly scheduled video and teleconferences, one-on-one, senior principal, project engineer kind of thing. For design projects, we had to have review of smaller pieces of the work ongoing. And we found different strokes for different folks were needed. Some people were very comfortable doing everything electronically. And so they would review pieces of drawings on PDF format. We tend to use Bluebeam in our office. Other offices will use Adobe products. But we had people who became very adept at making use of those sorts of electronic tools to do their reviews. On the other hand, we had people who weren't ready to go there. And so that meant you got to have a printer at home. You print out a small piece of a drawing, you mark it up, you scan it. So you got to have the scanner also. And we decided early on, we weren't going to force people to use tools that they were not comfortable with. So if they wanted to use the print and scan method, that was fine. If they wanted to use the electronic method, that was fine. And we got along that way. It meant not only are you going to make sure that everybody has a good workstation in terms of a computer and multiple screens at home, it also means they've got to have a printer and a scanner at home too. And that was fine. You get past all of that stuff. Reviewing calculations, same kind of thing had to happen. And sometimes when you were reviewing calculations performed in a sophisticated software package, that becomes difficult. You had to schedule times when various people could be using the licenses available on any particular software product, because we don't have every software package times the number of people we have licenses, if you will. Many software packages, we have 1 or 2 licenses. Reviewing reports didn't change nearly as much. We made a lot of use of, if the report's written in Microsoft Word, of track changes and comment versions and things like that. That can lead to a lot of extra overhead. It's not as efficient, if you will, but it worked. The final formal reviews of drawings, that one thing we couldn't change is we couldn't go put a large format plotting machine in everybody's home. So when you needed a full set of drawings, those got plotted out in the office, and either somebody delivered them to your home or you came by and picked them up. And, in many cases, you're still using the yellow pencil, red pencil method of making sure you're checking everything on those drawings. So that didn't change as much. However, the personal interaction of reviewing the comments with the producer of the drawings, that still had to be done remotely an awful lot of the time. And we did it, not convinced it's as effective. I know there are problems. I'll come back to what some of those problems are later on in response to another question.
Absolutely. Thank you for your detailed response. There's so many elements of it, right, that you don't even think about as far as the working environment. Michelle, I'll turn to you next. How have operations changed for you all?
So I will approach how change happened in our organization really from the employee perspective, or how did the employee experience change? And we had established, I've been with Barge a little over 6 years, and we had established 6 years ago our really strategic initiatives and our foundation. And so we had a values model, we call our CARES model. And then on that, our strategies were around creating a great employee experience so that our employees would then create a great client experience, design and deliver quality products and designs and services, and then the company would grow. So we had that as a foundation already, but in an instant, we have, I already said, 16 offices and about 420 employees. So overnight, we went from 16 offices to 420 offices, essentially, when everybody went home. So our IT department was fantastic in making sure people had what they needed. We're used to having full monitors at work and making sure people had what they needed at home. We too, Jim, we had some engineers that still liked the paper process of reviewing documents. So we would have them printed and delivered to their house so they could do review of documents. One of the biggest things, so prior, even though we had 16 offices, we had Skype. And so Skype was rarely used. We would use video or audio only, and video hardly ever was used. So we would still pick up the phone and call people, or call people through our computers using Skype, but never turn on the video. And one of the biggest changes that we see now is that people are very comfortable with video. We've actually gotten rid of our desk phones. So we now have Teams and operate on Teams. We don't have desk phones anymore. So even phone calls are coming through the Teams application. And when someone wants to reach out, and we're still working on this, but because that face-to-face is something, in terms of being in the office and someone just looking over a cubicle and saying, hey, what do you think of this? Or, what did I do this right? We're worried that that wasn't happening as much as someone just picking up, and dialing on Skype and asking that question and sharing their screen. So we're still changing in that aspect, but we do have a higher percentage of people that will be on video, that are comfortable talking through video. And for those offices, our headquarters are in Nashville, Tennessee, and all of the other 15 offices, it's almost leveled the playing field because they have always been remote. They might be the only one remote on a project, And now when we have meetings, instead of there being a group of people sitting in a conference room in Nashville and having remote people, everyone was in the same situation. So we say we leveled the playing field in terms of everyone coming from the same perspective. Because I don't know about you, but I've been the only one being remote and a group of people in a meeting, and it's really hard to participate when you're not in person.
Yeah, that's the challenge, right? Like being the only remote person is very, very difficult. It does kind of level, like you said, level the playing field. Dan, what about you? How have operations changed for you, and what have you learned during this time?
Well, so we've learned a lot, and one of the advantages of going forth is I get to play off of the comments of the other three presenters here. Um, we were on the way to switching from Skype to Teams before COVID hit, and all we had to do was speed it up. So that was we were right there. We were just about ready to launch, and we went ahead and launched. So we had to quickly learn how to use Teams so we could use the video aspects. We really encouraged everybody to use the video. We've learned how to use some of the other features, that are available for, presenting and sharing documents and those types of things. We already had a fairly robust SharePoint system internally. So a lot of our project files were already oriented around SharePoint before this happened so that we could just keep going with that same structure. And with respect to our quality systems, we have two key components to our quality systems, and it's individuals. We have a quality reviewer and we have an independent technical reviewer on each project. And those names are designated on each project. So what happens when you have offices like we do spread out all over the country, all of your ITRs do not sit in the same office where the people doing the work sit, because we don't have that many. And we keep that group fairly small, fairly tight. We keep track of making sure that the right expertise is involved in our independent technical review teams. But they're assigned to the project. So already before the pandemic hit, our teams were already used to having to go to a different office to get that technical review done, because it wasn't always a given that the ITR was sitting in the same office where the work was done. So that helped us. We were way ahead, I think, on that when we started this pandemic. The other thing that happens too is that while we are office based and we have teams in offices, a lot of our projects and our project delivery are done by groups. And those groups are never all in the same place. So they've already learned how to communicate this in between with the phone, with the Skype, and then now the Teams and the SharePoint. So we kept that going. I would say the one big thing that our operations management asked for was a better way of recording that reviews had been done. In the past, it was always up to the project manager to keep that information in the file. So we could go back to a file and we could document that a review had been done. And we had a system before, which we call Review Hub, which is an electronic system where you can electronically log reviews. And the only change we made was we made it mandatory. So a lot of people struggle a little bit with that. It literally only takes 15, 20 seconds to do your review. You can actually attach a copy of the review that you provided. So if you did markups on a Word document, or you did markups on a red line on a regular document, you just scan it in. You can attach it to your review. That's not required because it already exists in the SharePoint. But we were in pretty good shape from a quality management point of view before COVID hit. And I would say that actually we look back now after all these, 15 months or whatever it's been, and we're actually think we've gotten better in our quality management system because of COVID than we were before. We've seen some things along the way where we were probably missing things. Going back, and I think it might be your comment, Michelle, is that the one thing that we're afraid of is that sort of casual contact between employees doesn't happen. And where we thought we needed more of it, we've asked the people involved to schedule a daily call on Teams, even if it's only 5 or 10 minutes towards maybe in the 4 o'clock hour every day, to make sure that there's an opportunity for open conversation to occur without having a specific topic for that conversation. So that's a summary of where we've been, and we've actually thought that that we've gotten better at our quality systems through COVID.
That's great. That's great to hear. I know a lot of people have talked about being more efficient in their work, right? They're not worried about commuting or some of the other things that you would worry about if you were going into the office. So it's good to hear that. I know too, it's just being intentional, right? As far as scheduling time to have those conversations. So I'll move on to our next question. Again, just a quick reminder, if you have any questions, please ask them in the chat box. And we'd love to get to them. This is a great panel that has already shared so much expertise. So please feel free to ask any questions in the chat box. But I'll move on to the next question, which is how has COVID-19 impacted contractor claims, and why is this topic so important? Gowan, is this something you can speak to?
Sure. So, as I was I gave a little bit of a heads up in the intro, we haven't seen as many of the claims as we expected. We do expect claims to see more delay claims, et cetera. But let's just talk about, let's just take it back a little bit more generally. Workplace from home, remote, so especially in the architects, engineers field, I think more so than say accountants and lawyers, a lot more of their work, day-to-day work, involved field work. And Dan and Jim sort of outlined how they've actually been able to use the more remote ways into remote working and in fact actually increase quality, which is fantastic. But for the most part, it's been more heavily relied upon to be some field work in there as well as office work. But the reality is that most professionals had to move towards a remote environment, and naturally, not just do you need more equipment such as double monitors, etc., but printers, scanners, etc. But the problem is that now you've just increased the use or decreased the possibility of being hacked into. So cyber risks, we do believe, has increased across all of the lines, in particular ransomware. So Michelle actually mentioned, the ability to go from not just computers, but you actually eliminate your desktop. I'm sorry, not your desktop, but your desktop phone, your desk phone, and then use Teams. And I've certainly noticed it internally. Now I still, because I answer risk management hotlines, I use a thing called a phone, not just a team, not just a Teams meeting or whatever. So I have to answer a phone, and sometimes I'll call my colleagues now, and they're scrambling to be able to even answer it because they've got everything set up for the Teams meeting, which is fantastic that it works so seamlessly. But if you get hacked into and there's ransomware done where you're locked out of all of your systems, well, now not only can you not use your computers, access your files, etc., but you may not be able to use your phones at all. So while there's certainly a lot of benefits to it, there's downsides to it, and the cyber criminals out there are aware of that. So ransomware in some sense is increased not just because of more remote usage, but also because of the more heavy reliance that we've seen with the positive changes. The other part, from a claim standpoint, that we are particularly concerned about, first off, bad economies usually result in an increase in claims, not necessarily one-to-one, but over a period of time. But here we have the economy is kind of going in fits and starts. It's I think it's what they call like a K-shape economy, where we see problems, then it seems to get better, then there's other problems there. That makes it far more difficult to anticipate what types of claims are going to come. It's not going to be straightforward. To crash in 2008, we see an increase in claims eventually. This is going to be much more complicated. But the part that I think particularly impacts design professionals and types of claims we're going to see is There's going to be, there's new laws that are enacted and regulations that may impact design professionals. Standards of care may ultimately change. What worked for an HVAC system may not work going forward. There's a lot of retrofits out there. The retrofits, hopefully shouldn't impact what was done before, but those evolving space designs, sometimes plaintiffs' counsels look back and say, well, you should have designed the ventilation system for this school, originally different than you did. That's a tougher road to go for the plaintiff side, but nevertheless, we could see some types of standard of care changes and things are not adequate, for, say, talk about the hospital setting or the healthcare setting. Maybe now what standard care is not just different ventilation systems, but also using materials that are more disease resistant or germ resistant, et cetera. Certainly going forward, that's going to be a realistic perspective. We do expect, again, haven't seen a ton of it to back me up on the data, but when you're trying to keep your lights on during a pandemic and there's other projects shut down, there might be, more opportunity for little types of projects, maybe a little bit outside your bailiwick. Professional design professionals, we expect actually all professionals may be creating what's called like a dabbling risk or scope creep, where they're starting to do things that normally they didn't do because they got to keep things going and you got to keep the lights on, you got to pay your employees. And so you take on a little bit more than you're necessarily qualified to do. We certainly saw from the legal side of lawyers, suddenly everyone's an expert on COVID, we would see on their websites. Well, I mean, it's kind of hard to call yourself an expert, maybe by now, 15 months in, but it'd be hard to say that you were, an expert prior to March of 2020. But, there's going to be now some different types of risks that they're going to lead to claims. Again, not what we've seen. I anticipate a greater use of drones on project sites, to check progress of what's going on a job site. Thus, drones bring their own risk as well, from privacy risks to, maybe taking photographs of something next door that they shouldn't be, invading someone's privacy, to crashing in property risks if they were to crash into something next door, and they could cause some types of accidents, etc. Project sequencing. I think now projects are not going to, they're going to be sequenced differently, such as, even with the vaccines and everything, I still think that maybe you don't need all those subcontractors on the project site each and every day. You might, want to say, look, we're not going to allow more than 4 people in an elevator, a construction elevator. So, you're going to come do your project on this day, then the subcontractor that is going to back up and do what you're, finish your work is going to come in on different days. So, and then we expect fights over contracts. For instance, the shutdown caused a lot of design professionals and their attorneys to start looking at the force majeure clauses, which are often referred to as act of God. And even though act of God sounds like it's something that's not anticipated, actually most of the legal case law in most jurisdictions, not all, they look at, you still have to, you can use a force majeure clause, but you have to outline the type of risk that you're anticipating, such as poor weather, hurricanes, tornadoes, worldwide pandemics. Those aren't actually in a lot of force majeure clauses. That's certainly something to change from now. And so, we look at it as if someone's trying to, if there's a delay, they might say, well, was it a justified delay under the force majeure clause? And if the pandemic wasn't in there, they might still blame the design professional for the delay of a pandemic where there's a shutdown, et cetera. You might also want to have government ordered shutdowns. That's rarely was that type of discussion in force majeure clauses prior to COVID. Now you have to think about it. What if there's a delay caused by the government? Of course, that seems outside of the fault of the design professional or any of the professionals on a particular project. But legally, if someone can blame another party, when it comes down to money, people aren't as great of friends as they always are. So, those are some of the things that we're seeing. And, we can, as they say, this is a continually evolving area, and, we're trying to stay on top of it.
Yeah, no, and that's all you can really do, right? Is just try to what's changing. Dan, what about you? How has contractor claims impacted you?
We haven't really seen a change in contractor claims, and I think Gowan has the answer there, is that a lot of people are still kind of holding back because they're not really sure where it would go yet. So from an actual claims point of view, we're not seeing an increase. But I would say that one of the things we've seen that could potentially be a claim is the communication style and techniques changed on all of our projects, obviously, because of what happened. Site meetings no longer occurred with everybody there. So the notes of the site meeting became much more important because there were people that weren't there that probably would have heard it before, and now they can claim they didn't hear it because they weren't at the meeting. So while we always stressed good note taking and good communication on our projects, we expect that we're going to find in the future that some of that communication didn't occur the way we would like to have occurred. So we expect that we'll hear some of that. But I think that goes both ways too. Our clients had the same problem. The owners had the same problem. The other parties had the same problem. And I think what we're gonna find is that basically the old saying just by any lawsuit is the individual that wrote it down is the official record. So we had always trained our people to do a good job of writing the things down that had been agreed to. But I think that from a claims point of view, what we think we're going to see is more related to lack of communication in the field at critical decision points. That's what we expect to see more of that. And it's logical based on how the events went down.
Absolutely. Communication is so important during these difficult times. So I think the topic that we've all been talking about, at least I've been talking about personally and professionally, is the new variants, right? So looking ahead to summer and fall, can you describe your opening plans and whether new variants of the virus are impacting these plans? And what can others do as new variants emerge? Michelle, do you want to talk about what you all are doing as you're thinking about new variants of the virus?
I just shot a video this morning to communicate to all of our employees about the new variant and institution of mask wearing again in the office. So we actually returned to the office in September of 2020. So we asked people to come in just 2 days a week because we were seeing at first, in March and April, we were like, wow, we can do this. We're ticking along and everything's good. And as people got the Zoom or Teams fatigue, we saw some things start to wane a little bit. And so we said, okay, we need to get back into the office. We are very concerned about our early career engineers and architects and were they getting the development and the mentoring that they needed in that critical time during their careers. So in September 2020, we brought everyone back to the office 2 days a week. We had strict protocols. So you had to wear masks in the office if you were away from your desk. You had to do a wellness check before coming to the office. If you were ill, stay away, do not come to the office. We practice social distancing, but we started getting back together, and that worked really well. We track all of our cases that we've had, and once vaccinations were available, we track all of our vaccinations. We are currently at about 70% vaccinated, which we're very proud of because the nation, I think, is at 50%. So we're a lot higher than the country. And so in the beginning of June, we said we need people back into the office 4 days a week because, again, we were losing our connectivity, we were losing our camaraderie, and we felt that we needed just to do a reset and a mid-year reset and bring people back and kind of get started again. So we've been in the office 4 days a week since the beginning of June. We lifted all of our protocols once the CDC said, vaccinated people don't have to mask. And that is the big dilemma on, do we make our unvaccinated, the 30% of people mask, and our vaccinated people not mask? And we decided to ask people to monitor themselves, that we were not going to put any mandates. We were lifting all of our protocols, make good decisions. And if you were in a meeting where somebody wanted to mask, you had to be courteous of them and wear a mask. Otherwise, we lifted all of our protocols. For 2 months, that was fantastic. We didn't have, from May until the beginning of July, we had 0 COVID cases of our employees. And in the past 2 weeks, we've had 4. So just like what's happening in the nation, where the Delta variant is spreading, and the CDC now has this really cool map where you can see where there is high transmission, or what they're calling, I think, substantial transmission. And so they put out a new recommendation on, I think it was Tuesday, that if you're in an area with substantial transmission, then you should mask when indoors, whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated. So we are still in the office now 4 days a week, and we are reinstituting the mask mandate, and that announcement is going to go out tomorrow. And the map, almost all of the areas where our offices have substantial transmission. And we're really telling people that it is, we're proud that 70% of our people are vaccinated. And then if we all wear masks, we're doing our part to reduce the transmission, because the scientists and the medical professionals are very concerned. I read a study this morning that the Pfizer vaccine, I think it was 94% effective against other variants of COVID, like the Alpha and the Gamma, and maybe 80% with the Delta. So with the Delta, the vaccines are still working, but if the virus can spread like it is, that gives it opportunity to mutate, and it may mutate beyond the level of our vaccines can protect. So we're really calling for vaccinations of our employees. We're encouraging it, and we are asking them to mask up again starting Monday.
Yeah, it's a huge change, right? Just when you thought things were getting better. Jim, do you want to talk about what all you are doing in anticipation for the Delta variant, and how you all are planning?
Sure. So, like Barge, we did not actually have a company-wide policy on returning to the office. It was person by person, and by basically probably close to the end of the calendar year 2020, 80% of us were in the office 5 days a week. In our office, we have a setup that I think is probably not normal for a lot of engineering offices. Everybody has their own individual office. And so we didn't require you to wear a mask when you're working at your desk in your office. You go to the library, the kitchen, any other public areas, you masked up. All right. We did that through the point that everybody, and we're small firm, 10 people, everybody's vaccinated and has been for some time. Once we got to that point, then there was no internal requirement for masking, even when you were in public areas. It looks like we will probably have to go back to that because of the Delta variant, but right now, we're not in one of the areas that has the substantial transmission going on, so we're waiting to see what the recommendations end up being for places like this. And yeah, it will be easy to go back to the protocol that we did have, and that won't be a problem. At this point, I think we have 100% of the people that are in the office part-time, and about 80% of us are here full-time.
Wow, Dan, what about you guys? What are you all doing with the variant?
Well, we haven't actually made any decisions about the variant yet. We're kind of waiting to see what the politicians do. We have offices in many parts of the country, though, where some of the governors are more aggressive than other governors, and we have, like in our Florida offices, there seems to be no pressure. In our California offices, we're getting different a different message. We actually never really closed our offices, even ones that we mostly closed. We do a lot of critical infrastructure work. And so in most cases, we were exempt from the closing orders. So we sent everybody home because we didn't want people to get sick. So that was primarily an HR issue. It wasn't a government mandate. And in most offices, all we had to do is so that people could commute to and from the offices in a couple locations. Pennsylvania was pretty aggressive. There were some other places that were fairly aggressive. We had to issue them a letter saying they're part of critical infrastructure, so they were permitted to commute to and from the office. And so we never actually closed anything because, and we have laboratories and field services, so a lot of those continued. But now that everybody's used to working from home, or a large percentage of the people are used to working from home, we've been trying to figure out how to bring them back. So a week after the July 4th, so what had that been, July 11th, I think it was, we did what we called a soft opening. We made sure everybody understood that our offices were open and available, their desks were still there, their monitors were still there. Everybody should come in and start getting used to coming back. And our plan has been to make it basically mandatory by the Tuesday after Labor Day that you have to come back. And if you're not coming back full time, you need to have an agreement with your supervisor and the company, a written agreement as to what the working arrangements are going to be, so that we can make sure that we've got some consistency. So that's what we're working with right now. I think the Delta variant, I'm not our HR person, so I don't know what they're working on, but I'll guarantee you they're holding meetings even today, trying to figure out whether we should move that September date a little later, and make sure that we understand what's going on in the world with this Delta variant. But we've encouraged everybody to get vaccinated. We didn't make it mandatory, and we're using an honor system. There's a website. Once you've been vaccinated, you're supposed to go in and declare that you've been vaccinated, but that's completely honorary. We're not asking anybody to provide any evidence or certificates or anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me move on. I think we probably have time for one more question. So what changes have you made to your quality programs as a result of the pandemic? What best practices have emerged for producing quality design in a remote or hybrid work environment? Gowan, can I turn to you first?
Well, in tying in this one, I actually want to go back to something that Michelle had mentioned from an HR standpoint about training of younger engineers and design professionals, and that definitely the remote environment doesn't lend itself as well towards training. Exacerbating that particular issue, which is a very real issue, because younger engineer, I mean, they're the future, and they're going to be the future of doing things either right. I mean, you can always get a claim. There's plenty of frivolous claims, believe me. So it doesn't matter if someone is doing everything 100% right or not. But obviously, to the extent that you can train your younger engineers to do well, I think is an extremely important point that she made. But we've also seen a lot of older, more experienced design professionals had been thinking about possibly retiring and or at least slowing down. Well, when COVID happened, a lot of them just said, I'm done. I don't even want to deal with this. So exacerbating the problem of training is also some of your more experienced people that would do the training may not be around to do the training. So we see that as a problem we probably won't see. We're always trying to look at we're always trying, from a carrier standpoint, look at the crystal ball for like next month. What's it today? What's it going to be next month? What's it 6 months? But at the same time, we also have to look at where's the industry going to be 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road as well. And I think that that's where you might see some of that. Hopefully it can be rectified, and that, the variant doesn't, preclude this another year out where training is missed again, or at least not as successful as it might be, together. And that's probably where I would think the bigger bigger outfits such as I'll leave it to them to describe, but where training is going to have to be somewhat formalized around planning for remote training in some fashion too, because it's probably not going to be as easy as just saying it's going to be all or one. I think, we're looking at a hybrid work environment probably going forward for some time. I mean, especially it's not even just the variants, it's the reports coming out that, and I forgot, I think it was Michelle who mentioned that the Pfizer is less effective against the Delta variant, but I think I read just a report this morning that it's less effective after 6 months, that they're recommending now a third booster. I, for instance, got a Johnson & Johnson one shot, and I've been particularly concerned that there's been a lot of talk about that the Johnson & Johnson one shot could use a booster from either Pfizer or Moderna. So this seems like it's going to be an ongoing issue in the workplace, not just for vaccination one time, but looking at vaccinations going forward. And I think training is going to be a big part of that, and and trying to avoid claims going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Jim, can I turn to you next? What best practices have you seen?
Well, so I think one thing that we've seen that we want to continue on, and that is being a little more formal in scheduling time, especially with the younger engineers. I think we concluded that for the older engineers, and we have a lot of old engineers out of our 10 people in this firm, that the methods that we had, converted to, they have been generally successful from a quality control point of view. There's no question that teamwork and camaraderie have suffered. They are not the same. Efficiency has suffered because collaboration, sometimes, that 2 minutes spent talking in the kitchen over getting a new cup of coffee is wasted time that wouldn't be wasted if you were at home. Well, yeah, but half the time those conversations are about a project and they actually speed things along. We think things are less efficient. But then when we look at the work done by less experienced engineers, the altered method is definitely not as successful. We've learned the lesson. We don't want to stay there. We want to get back to what we had with them. There's no question about it. It's less efficient for our clients. From the productivity point of view, it is far less efficient from the personal growth of the young engineer point of view. We've got concerns that the quality of work has suffered. So there are a few things that we think are improvements, but most of what we've learned is we'd rather not do it that way.
What's the reason behind that?
Oh, well, it's exactly what I think I just said. Teamwork suffers, camaraderie suffers, efficiency suffers, and especially personal growth of young engineers suffers. All of those things are net negatives.
Dan, what about you? Do you have best practices to share?
I think I mentioned the one that we really focused on already, and I'll just repeat it, is we had an electronic system already called Review Hub where you could log your multiple different types of reviews. If you did a calculation check, there was a way to log it there. If you did the independent technical review of a project, you could log it there. And we encouraged people to use this, but it wasn't mandatory. We've made it mandatory. We found that there was almost no way to check to see that for the operations leadership to check to make sure that the quality systems were being implemented if people aren't logging in the Review Hub. So that's the one big change that we've made as a result. And just going to training, I agree with Jim. We're really worried about the entry level and junior engineers. We actually had somebody who joined us about 6-8 months ago and then quit about a month ago. And they said they didn't come to a company to work alone. And so we're a little confused by that, because we haven't had much control. They actually are based in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is one of the most aggressive places for keeping people out of the office. So we were a little confused by that, but we expect that that's a similar sentiment that we're going to find in young people. And so we've actually spent a lot of time and effort in the last 6 months, 12 months, improving our internal training systems that are done online. Now, one of the things I've found is from a quality point of view is I can send somebody through the quality training online, and then I can hold a conference call or a Teams call with them. And they missed about half of what was in the training program. It's pretty obvious by the questions they ask. So we're backing it up with one individual one-to-one conversations or 1 to 10 conversations. And those are meetings we used to hold in person, and we're now holding them on Teams. So I suspect the next step will be that we're going to find as soon as we get back and we can start holding meetings in person, we've got to do it.
Awesome. Well, we've only got about 3 minutes left, but this has been a fantastic discussion, and I'd like to ask each of you to have about 30 seconds or so to kind of wrap up the conversation. Just a quick recap. Gowan, do you want to go first?
Sure, I've had the benefit of always going first, so I thank all of you to follow that. I know there's advantages sometimes. I would say that the main thing is to be flexible, be aware of legal changes. Zoning legal changes will affect the day-to-day practice of being a design professional, and I really think that you can't rest on your laurels because things are changing constantly. And I think that all these discussions from everyone on this panel today have been talking about adapting to the environment as it's presented to you. And that dynamic I don't think has changed. I think we're sort of still working it within that dynamic, and it might be here to stay. And so trying to figure out what the best practices are going forward, with an eye that those best practices could change come September, if something else developed. It's frustrating to not feel comfortable because you've got these shifting sands. You're not on solid footing all the time, but I think it's a reality that we're just going to have to learn to adjust with going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Jim, do you want to go next? It looks like you were ready to go next. So
Yeah, sure. I would just say that, this experience has certainly emphasized the importance of being flexible in terms of how you work with people and within a team. And that's good. The big lesson with respect to today's fundamental subject is you cannot be flexible about quality control. You still have to get a quality service and product out of your office.
Here on that.
Absolutely. Michelle, you want to go next?
Yeah, first I just want to say thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. I've spoken on a lot of HR panels, but this is my first engineering panel that I've been part of. So it's been really fun, and I've learned from a lot of people. I would ditto what Jim said in terms of it's the output that matters and how we get to the output, the final design, the quality design. That's what matters. But we have to be very diligent and not concerned about following up, and be very intentional that if you need somebody's advice, if you want somebody's opinion, if you need someone to look at things, use the methods you have. We can go to the cell phone, which I do still have those. I just don't have a desk phone. But we now have the opportunity, as I called it before, leveling the playing field. And it's been kind of fun where I've just dialed somebody up on Teams with my video on, and they answer, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, let me get my video on, and they'll turn their video on. So if we can be much more intentional, there is that capability to connect more and better, especially with the shared screen, with anybody really across the world. So let's not let our personal inhibitions limit us in the ability to communicate and connect, even if we are remote.
Absolutely. And Dan, I'll let you go ahead and close us out.
I'll go real quick. I've always said through the 40-some years of my career, I've always asked, why do we do it that way? And when the answer comes back, because that's the way we've always done it, I know we're not thinking. So I think the pandemic really was a switch that flipped for a lot of people. You can't keep coming back and say, because that's the way we've always done it. And hopefully everybody that's on this call can go back and say to themselves, this pandemic showed me we can do things differently. We always have to be willing to grow. We always have to be willing to do it differently, and something else will occur in the future, and we'll be ready for it. Thank you.
Nicely said, Dan.
No, thank you all. I really appreciate your time today. And just a quick reminder, I will be sharing out the recording to everyone that's registered. And you can always still access and continue this conversation on ASC Collaborate for any ASCE members. And I put the link in the chat box for other virtual events. So thank you again to our panel. This has been a great discussion. I apologize for a few minutes over time, but thank you again. Greatly appreciate it.